So what do we do as leaders when we feel we need to energize the team? So a lot of us might have scenarios where we've got a team of people that are great people, really passionate, really engaged, they're bought into what we're trying to do. We've got great capability, but we're just now seeing some fatigue really set in. There's a little bit of burnout that's setting in, and you're starting to see the energy drop off. What are the things that we can do as leaders in these moments? Well, one of the things to recognize is there's always going to be natural ups and downs in energy. Like that's a natural thing throughout the day, throughout the week, and then particularly throughout the course of the year. And for a lot of leaders and organizations right now, fatigue is probably kicking in more than usual. We've got shortages in talent, we've got increasing expectations, so the challenge is probably greater than ever. So what do we do to lift the energy without piling on more work for our team? Well, what we want to do when we're struggling for energy is use what are called energizers. So these are some little things that we can do in the day-to-day that don't require extra time, don't require extra work, and doesn't require us to push our team when they're already working hard. So some things that naturally lift the energy. First of those is to make sure that we've got rest and movement happening. Now, what I mean by rest and movement, even for teams that are really busy, is just making sure that our people are taking their breaks throughout the day. Just taking a bit of a break when they need to, the coffee break, morning tea break, taking time for lunch, because we know there is a law of diminishing returns. And whilst you may think, oh, if I just finish this off, then that'll really help me get through the day. I've just got to do this one last thing. And this propensity to not take breaks, we don't realize how much that can impact our productivity and then actually how much that can kick in our fatigue. So just making sure we're taking rests, just making sure also that our teams are getting up and moving. So staying sedentary for those that work in an office environment, like I'm still surprised how often we see people still just staying at desks for hours and hours on end, not getting up and moving around. Those sorts of things are actually really, really important as an energizer. Another thing is what's called a change of scenery. So a change of scenery is actually changing where something happens. So meetings are a really good example. If we're having back-to-back virtual meetings, then just being able to change that, which is kind of really fatiguing, just changing it up by maybe having a walking meeting, which is a phone meeting. So I'm not taking the energy of having to stare at a screen, but we might all be walking and moving, which is creating the movement part, and I'm just listening, which is different. Also outside, which is actually kind of really energizing for me. Could be maybe going from virtual to face-to-face if that's possible and practical. So getting into a face-to-face environment, it's more energizing. Maybe there's a meeting room that we normally have a discussion in, moving into a more creative space or maybe outdoors or something. So just by changing the scenery, that in itself can be remarkably energizing. Another energizer is what's called a change of emphasis. So sometimes if we're doing things repetitively over and over again, it means that the left side of the brain gets quite mechanical. And something that's quite energizing is if we actually pause and start to use the right side of the brain, which is more creative. So even if we're taking the existing agenda of existing things that we need to do, but just maybe mixing it up, doing it in a creative way, maybe adding in some ideation on things, using some creative tools if you're actually working virtually, anything that disrupts the way we're doing it. If we want teams to think a little bit differently, then we've got to create some energizers that change that thinking. So making things more creative is one. Another thing is maybe doing deep dives is another way to do a change of emphasis. So instead of trying to cram in lots of things, we just focus on one or two things. Flip side is if we have been spending a lot of time on one or two things, one of the things that can be energizing is to just maybe do lots and lots of little things. So maybe we just commit to knocking off lots of decisions and working through a list really quickly, which gives us a sense of progress and achievement, which in itself can be energizing. Another thing that is energizing is connection. Just actually taking time, making sure there are moments throughout the week that is just about how are you, how you're going, and just time connecting. Could be a coffee meeting, it could be time for lunch, whatever it might be, but where the focus is just taking time to connect, forgetting about work for a minute, and it's taking time to continue to build relationships and be there for each other. Connection time is always energizing. Another one is learning. Now, what I mean by learning, this is not about necessarily trying to add in new training and development time if people are already feeling that they're stretched with capacity, but changing the way we're doing things to bring learning moments in. That could actually be just having some time to discuss what are we doing well, what can we do differently, maybe bringing in some lunch and learn pieces, bringing in some brown bag sessions into what we're doing, but just actually sprinkling in could be guest speakers coming into existing rhythms, anything that just is a little bit disruptive, but is just giving people an opportunity to work on themselves in existing rhythms and existing agendas. Now, I know sometimes when we're fatigued, we may not think we're in the right headspace for learning. That's why if we just do it in existing things that we've already got in place, it's not an extra time, but those little half an hour energizers, 30 minutes is kind of really uplifting for people. And the last one, which is always energizing, is making sure we take time to recognize and celebrate. So switching gears off what we do on a day-to-day basis and just making sure that with your peers, with your team, even with your leaders, there are moments when you're just doing shout-outs, appreciation, recognition, just celebrating the things that we've done, which again takes the mind off the things that we need to do, sometimes the overwhelm and the worry about all the stuff that we've got on. Just taking those times to recognize and appreciate is really energizing for people. So when we've got a team that's at capacity but they're already bought in, these are just 5 or 6 key energizers we can do in the day-to-day to make a difference. Wish you all the best.